Okay, this begins part 2 of chapter 6, Learning and Performance Management. So we start this second part of chapter 6 talking about social learning theory. The main line from social learning theory is essentially this, that we can learn from others' experiences, whether that's through direct observation of people, storytelling, whatever. Thank goodness for this. If you can imagine, if each of us had to learn every single thing the hard way, by ourselves. In other words, if there weren't books, if there weren't people from whom we could learn, if there weren't people that we could watch, if there weren't, again, other ways that we could learn, if we had to only learn from our own experience, it would, well, we wouldn't learn a whole lot, frankly, over the course of our lives, and it would be a very difficult experience. But instead, we are able to learn. So, what are the processes that actually influence social learning? And I want you to pay very careful attention to what I'm going to be talking about. There are 4 different processes that are key. The first deals with attention. And what we know is that in order for us to learn, in order for me to learn from another person, the first thing that has to be true is I have to pay attention to that other person. So if you think about a classroom, for example, in a face-to-face classroom, one of the things that a teacher might do to try and ensure that students are paying attention is to first ask them to watch and to listen. That would be part of it. But then to also do things that are more likely to encourage people paying attention. For example, walking around, changing one's tone, using maybe a film clip, or asking people to engage in an activity, something that it makes it easier for students to pay attention to the teacher, because this is a first step. Then there's the retention piece, which is basically how well can people remember what we did. This is why, for example, when we're in face-to-face class, I will tell you stories that have maybe a funny aspect to them, or a particularly interesting punchline, or something unique, something different, something that's novel. And that's all so that there's a greater likelihood that you'll remember what it is that I was doing and what it was that I was saying. The most important aspect for us to learn from others is for us to also reproduce what they're doing, what they're saying with our own bodies, with our own minds. And this is where doing comes into play. We have to actually do things in order to really learn them. So the example I like to use is if we wanted to learn how to golf, let's say, golf at all or golf better, it's very easy to watch a program. It's very easy to watch a person. But at the end of the day, the number one way in which any one of us really learns how to do something is by doing that thing. So we have to at some point get on the course. We've got to pick up, the iron. We've got to put the ball down. We've got to swing at the ball. That's how we really learn what we're doing. This is true with every single thing that we do. In order to really learn it, we've got to do it. We've got to do it. Then the last piece is reinforcement. So, as it says, and no surprise from the first part of this chapter, behaviors that are reinforced are the ones that are given more attention. They're the ones that are learned better. They're the ones that are performed more. So we need to get reinforced. So when we're learning from that teacher, for that person to acknowledge what we've said, when we write a correct answer, to get a positive grade, to go to work and talk about what we learned in class on a given day, and people are saying, oh yeah, that's exactly how we do things here, or wow, that's really useful information, or whatever it is that they might say. Some form of reinforcement is necessary. Now, a particular slice of social learning theory is what's called self-efficacy theory. This is frankly one of the most important theories that you'll learn this semester. Reinforcement theory in general is a critical theory that we're going to come back to again and again and again. This notion that when we provide a positive reinforcement or take away something negative in order to reinforce a behavior, that people are more likely to repeat that behavior, to get even better at that behavior. Self-efficacy is another theory that's critically important. It says that this is all about an individual's feeling that he or she can complete a task. Another way of putting it is task-specific self-confidence. When people have a high degree of task-specific self-confidence, they are exponentially more likely to be successful, to perform at a high level. In fact, the research tells us that when people don't have a high degree of self-efficacy, even if they have a high degree of actual ability, if they don't believe that they can do something, if they don't have task-specific self-confidence, they are not likely to perform well. So having a high degree of self-efficacy enhances the probability that goals will be achieved. In other words, that you'll actually perform at the desired level. So how do we increase self-efficacy? It's such an important thing. It makes all the difference in everything we do. Everything from taking a test to making a sale, to being a competent parent, to being a good friend. The more confident that you are that you can do that thing, whatever that thing is, again, the greater the likelihood that you will be able to do it and do it well. So this notion of how do we increase self-efficacy becomes really important, not only for other people, when we're trying to increase other people's self-efficacy, but just for ourselves. So what does it take? There are 4 things we can do to increase self-efficacy. Number 1, we have to have experience doing that thing. So I want you to think about public speaking, for example. With public speaking, as with any other thing that we do, as with any skill, the more you do it, typically at least, the better you get at it. And the fancy phrase for this is enactive mastery. And what this really boils down to, and you want to make sure you write this down, is doing the thing. So with public speaking, many people find this to be a very scary, a very threatening thing to have to do. But really the only way to get over that and the only way to get good at it is just to do it. I started doing public speaking when I was in 2nd grade. That's a long time ago. Let's see, I would have been 7. So it's almost 45 years ago. 45 years of public speaking that I've been doing. So I've had lots and lots and lots of practice. Generally speaking, I would rank my public speaking self-efficacy as incredibly high, mainly because I've just done it a lot, and because I've been reinforced. Think back to social learning theory. I've been reinforced, positively reinforced for the way that I do it. So doing something is number 1, the most important thing that impacts your self-efficacy, which is why we make you write so that you become more and more confident with writing. This is why we make you present so that you become more and more confident with presenting. So doing, doing, doing. The second is, again, watching other people. So having models of behavior. The fancy phrase again is vicarious modeling. So this is watching other people. Watching other people and really paying attention to what they're doing. So when I sit in on other people's classes, for example, or when I go to presentations, I really pay careful attention to what people are doing, because I'm always looking for new ways of trying to teach, new ways of trying to interact with people, more effective ways. So watching is key. The third is verbal persuasion from others. So if I tell you, of course you can do well on this test, you've been in class, you're going to do well, you listening to me and believing what I'm saying will be key to my verbal persuasion being effective, to my verbal persuasion having an impact on your self-efficacy. So really listening. And the last is this assessment of physical and emotional abilities, specifically arousal. So when you have to do a speech, when most people have to do a speech or have to do a presentation, there are any number of physiological and emotional things that happen, cues, if you will, that what you need to do is interpret them correctly. You need to interpret them positively. So, for example, when I'm going to do a presentation in front of a really large group of people, and it's a presentation that I really want to do well. It's very important to me. I want to make sure I knock it out of the park. I want to make sure that it's amazing, well, at least as amazing as I can try to make it. I'm going to feel a little nervous. Maybe my hands might be a little sweaty, my knees might be a little shaky. I could feel my heart beating. What I need to do in order to enhance my self-efficacy is to tell myself that the reason I'm feeling all of those things I'm feeling, all of that nervousness or anxiety is because I want to do a good job. And because I want to do a good job, I'm going to nail this. I'm going to do a really amazing presentation. The person who doesn't have a high sense of self-efficacy will interpret those exact same cues to mean, oh my God, I'm going to fall apart here. Oh my God, I'm so stressed out. And so what they'll end up doing is becoming so focused on their stress and their response to their stress that they might not do a very good job, which leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where oh my God, I'm so nervous, I'm so anxious, and that's because I'm not very good at this, and then they don't perform at a very high level, and then their self-efficacy around that particular task diminishes. So what I'm saying to you is you need to use more appropriate, more positive self-talk that says, I'm feeling all of these things because I care and because I'm going to do a great job. So again, these 4 steps that you can use to help you increase your own self-efficacy or other people. The first relates to doing, that's enactive mastery. The second relates to watching, that's vicarious modeling. The third relates to listening, that's verbal persuasion. And then the last relates to, you really trying to understand why you're feeling a certain way, and that relates to arousal. All right, switching gears, we're going to talk about goal setting. Goal setting is important not only at work but also in our personal lives. It can really do some important things for us. So specifically, what goals do in the workplace is they help us to crystallize, to really focus, to really, come to grips with our sense of purpose and mission. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? Not only coming up with goals, but sort of writing them down, sharing them can really help us to be clear about what it is we're trying to accomplish. As a result, goals help to increase our work motivation, and which then leads to increasing task performance. Having goals helps to reduce our role stress, because when we've set goals, what it does for us, one of the key things that it does for us is it helps us to make choices between different options. So I know that let's say that you're a student who's decided you want to get an A in a class. Well, then when you're faced with, oh, I could go out tonight with my friends, or I could do this homework that I need to do in order to help me achieve that goal of an A. Well, if you've really set that goal and you've really committed to that goal, you're going to choose to get that homework done and maybe meet up with your friends later. The last thing that goals in the workplace do for us is they improve the accuracy and validity of our performance evaluations. So they give our bosses, our managers, something against which to judge our behaviors. Now, what makes for a good goal? Good goals, effective goals, are goals that are smart. So this time of the year, people are often, early February, they're coming off the high of having set their New Year's resolutions, and we read all sorts of things that tell us that many people set these resolutions and then they don't succeed at them. And the reason for that is that oftentimes the goals that we set, those resolutions that we set, they're not smart. And let me show you exactly what we're talking about. So first of all, they need to be specific. So rather than a person saying, I'm going to exercise more this year, they would say, I'm going to exercise at least 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes each time. Okay? So very specific. Very specific lets us know whether we're on track. Knowing whether we're on track helps us to make adjustments to our behaviors so that we can actually accomplish these goals. So specific is really critical. Goals also have to be measurable. We have to have a way of knowing, again, very specifically and in a way that we can measure whether we're on track. So you can measure whether you've been to the gym, let's say, 3 times in the last week. You can measure whether you've exercised at least 30 minutes each time. You can use the clock, you can use the calendar to help you measure whether you're on track. In the workplace, you can measure whether you're making the sales that you said you would make. You can measure whether you're keeping inventory at the level you said you would keep it. You can measure how many projects you're getting done in a particular time frame. Goals have to be attainable given the resources that we have, given the time that we have, given the money that we have, given the people that we have, given the equipment that we have. Can we actually achieve those goals? That's another A word you could use here. They're achievable. They also have to be realistic. So, is it realistic to say that you could lose 10 pounds in the next week? Um, maybe you could, but you're probably going to put it right back on. In order to lose 10 pounds in 1 week, for most people anyway, that would be water weight, and you'd be putting it right back on as soon as you eat or have anything to drink. So it has to be realistic. It has to be something that makes sense. It has to be something that ties in with the rest of your lifestyle, something that you actually care about, something that you're willing to commit to. If not, then it's not a smart goal. And the last, it has to be time bound. So again, what's the time frame for your goal? And is it realistic? Is it attainable? Can you measure it? So when you say, going back to my articulation of specific, to say 3 times in a week, for 3 times, and I'm going to do that for the next month. I'm going to do that for the next 2 months. I'm going to seal that deal within the next 60 days. I'm going to have that part of the project done by next Friday. If you don't set time limits, what tends to happen is the goal just keeps getting pushed out further and further into the future, at which point you're not going to be more motivated, you're not going to perform at a higher level, it's not going to help you choose between options, etc. Now, one of the interesting things about the goal setting literature, and there are lots, this is a literature that's big, there's been a lot of research done since the 1960s on goal setting, but one of the more interesting findings, I think, is this relationship between goal level and task performance. And what we have learned from the research is that when people set very difficult goals for them, first of all, very specific goals that are also very difficult, they tend to perform at a higher level, as opposed to when they set goals that are actually really easy. And this has everything to do with the extent to which we focus our effort when we select difficult versus easy goals. So let's say that you decided that for the semester, you're just going to get all D's in your classes because, D's get degrees, or all C's. Again, C's get degrees. As opposed to if you decided that you were going to shoot for all A's. And that was something that was realistic for you. It was actually attainable for you. If you set the goal of all A's, what you'll end up doing is, well, think about it. You'll end up focusing better. You'll end up probably managing your time better. You'll end up probably making smarter choices about how to allocate your time. And you will frankly be more likely, if not to achieve all A's, you're going to have a much higher GPA than if you said, okay, I just need to get C's this semester. For most people, given a typical semester, getting C's is pretty doable without an extraordinary amount of effort. You could still go out, you could still socialize, you could sleep in, you might choose to skip class. And so the end result of all of those decisions will be you're not going to perform at the same high level as you would if you had set very difficult goals. So the lesson here is give yourself difficult goals, set difficult goals, not with the expectation that you'll always get to the highest level, but that you'll get to a higher level than you would if you had set easy goals. Next, we shift over to talking about performance. This is a pretty significant part of the text. And so we begin by talking about what it is. Performance management is all about defining, measuring, appraising, and then, providing feedback on and improving your performance. So the process. You need to define performance in behavioral terms. Think about yourself as a manager, or you can think about yourself defining your performance in what you might consider key behaviors. What behaviors do you expect to perceive? Then you need to measure that performance, see how you're doing. You need feedback so that you know if you need to adjust your strategies, if you need to change the way you're doing things. So let's say I want my performance to be an A in the class, and throughout the semester you have different ways of measuring. You'll get a test score, you'll get other things that will tell you whether you're on track. Those measurements are essentially a form of feedback If you were thinking about another person, you would have a meeting, you would have a conversation, you would send a memo letting the person know how they're doing relative to the goals, relative to what you're hoping they'll accomplish, so that, again, they can make adjustments and therefore improve their performance. Performance appraisal is something that for some people, unfortunately, doesn't happen formally at all. For other people, happens formally maybe once a year. In truth, people need feedback, and all of the research that I've read on millennials, people in the millennial generation suggest that they want even more feedback than prior generations have looked for. So we need to give people feedback on how they're doing so that they know whether they need to make changes. Performance appraisal, again, where maybe you ask the employee to do a self-evaluation, you do an evaluation, you gather data from their coworkers, maybe from their customers and others, sort of a 360-degree performance appraisal, helps you to know what their developmental needs are. Let's say they want to at some point be promoted to manager. Okay, well, what will they need in order to achieve that promotion? Will they need additional training? Will they need additional education, etc.? Performance appraisal can help you decide who to promote and who and how much to reward. It can also be used to decide who should be demoted, in other words, from the position they're in, go down a position, who maybe should be terminated, who is not fulfilling the terms of their contractual obligation, who is not able to do what's in their job description. It also gives us, on a meta level, information about the organization's selection and placement decisions. Are we recruiting the right kinds of people? Are we selecting the right kinds of people? Are we finding that after we've hired them that they have all kinds of performance issues? Well, that tells us that maybe we should change some things. Really good appraisal systems need to be valid, meaning that they're measuring what they purport to measure. They're actually measuring the right things. They have to be reliable, which means they're consistent over time and across people. They have to be responsive, meaning that, for example, people get feedback when they need feedback. It doesn't do any good to tell somebody a year after they've done something that what they did was wrong or that they should have changed what they did. They need to be flexible to take into account that people's activities may in fact differ from what their job description says they're doing, and that may be exactly what the organization needs. And they need to be equitable. They need to be fair. They need to take into account people's inputs, what they're bringing to a job, and people's outputs, what they're actually delivering. When you're giving feedback, you need to refer to specific statements and behaviors, things that a person has actually said, so verbatim, and things that you have observed. So we can't focus on performance. We can't assume that we know what somebody's doing based upon one outcome. We need to talk about things we've actually observed. We also need to focus on things that are changeable, that things that people can learn to do differently and better. Both the supervisor or the manager and the employee should plan again, be organized before they meet, before they sit down to talk. I personally like employees to do a self-evaluation because that gives me insight into their thinking. And for both of us to come into a conversation with a sense of what we're going to talk about. And we always begin with something positive, not with any sense or attempt to be manipulative, but there's always something positive that we can talk about. And we want everyone to be in a positive frame of mind, whether we're talking about behaviors that have all been fantastic or we're talking about improvement. It's impossible for people to accept feedback that isn't positive if they haven't at least started out in a positive frame of mind. Previous slide, I was talking about, okay, we need to figure out the primary cause, and under determining the problem source, I was saying, okay, start from the notion that it's the organization and then consider the employee. Well, with attribution theory, each of us has a tendency to attribute the cause of people's behavior to different things, and so we want to understand that better. There are three pieces of data that we use to help us attribute cause. One is consensus. So we look at the extent to which peers in the same situation behave the same way. So let's imagine you're a manager and you're looking at one of your employees and the person is late. So you might start by saying, okay, well, there are other folks in the office. Are they also late? So the extent to which peers are behaving the same way. A second dimension or factor is distinctiveness, which is the degree to which the person behaves the same way in other situations. So the person is late coming to meetings of the department. Is the person late for other events, for other get-togethers, or not? And the last factor is consistency. So here we're talking about the frequency of a particular behavior over time. So does it happen a lot? Is it a rare thing? What exactly is the frequency? So we'll go back up to consensus. So I have a colleague who has a reputation for tardiness. With respect to consensus, this person will be tardy even when other people are on time. With respect to distinctiveness, this person will be tardy like all the time. The person is tardy for everything, for work events, for social events. The person is just always tardy. And then with consistency, this person has been tardy for as long as I have known this person, and it's more than 20 years. And this person is always tardy. So we use these information cues and attributions to decide, is the cause of a person's particular behavior, is it the person, is it internal, or is it external to the person? Is there some other source that should be held accountable? So let's imagine at the top here, a customer has complained about John. So thinking about consensus, we discover that there are no complaints about other employees. So there's low consensus. With respect to distinctiveness, we know that John has received similar complaints in the past. So this isn't a unique thing. The distinctiveness is low. And then finally, complaints about John have been coming in pretty steady. So there's a lot of frequency. There's a high consistency. When we put those pieces together, we would make an internal attribution. In other words, we would assume that John's behavior is coming from internal causes. We attribute John's behavior to internal causes. We say that John's behavior, it's coming from inside of him. It's not external. You could use a different example, or you could go the other way. So a customer has complained about John. Change it up. Let's say, in fact, customers are complaining about everybody. There's high consensus. And in terms of distinctiveness, nobody ever complains about John. This is pretty rare, and also this is infrequent. The consistency is low. Well, then we'd say there's got to be something bizarre that's happening, probably outside of John, that we would make an external attribution. Something else is going on. So the model, we observe the performance, let's say someone being late. We take in the cues, consensus, consistency, and distinctiveness, and then we make an attribution. We say either it's internal or it's external, and that's how we say, yep, it's either the employee who's responsible or it's the organization, and then we need to have behavior that's appropriate. So, let's say in a couple of weeks, I'm in class, and I notice that a whole group of people come in late to class. It isn't just one person, it's a whole group of people. And based upon what I observe in terms of consistency, consensus, consistency, and distinctiveness, I decide that there must be an external cause. There was a snowstorm that caused a lot of people to have trouble with their vehicles. The source of the responsibility is something outside of those people. I don't need to change the policy for class at that point. I don't need to ding people for their tardiness at that point, because clearly this was something that was outside of their control. On the other hand, if I've got one person who's consistently late, and that person doesn't say anything to me, doesn't say, well, the reason I'm always late is because I've got a class over in some other part of campus that's at a distance, and the person who leads my last class tends to always keep us late. Well, again, that would be an external cause. If I don't hear or see any of that, I'm probably going to say, hey, I've got somebody here who just has a hard time being on time. I need to say something to that person and possibly lower that person's attendance grade. Okay, my advice to you is read very carefully the information on attribution theory that's provided for you in your text. And I think that you'll see that this model really makes a lot of sense, that it's something that we all do all the time. We're always judging whether people are personally responsible for their behavior or whether the responsibility for a person's behavior lies outside of them. It's external. And that, as we say, that's all, folks, for Chapter 6.